I just want to say to any of you who are parents, if something happened that you don't feel good about, I'd be shocked if it was your fault, you know. One of the things that we look at a lot in the Castellino work is what we call layers of support. That mothers, you know, they say it takes a village. Mothers can't do it on their own. And, you know, it's part of our culture, the modern Western world, to have isolated little families without support, you know. And without support, it's very difficult to meet our children's needs. It's probably impossible. So I invite you, if this is resonant for you, to be kind to yourself and consider that you did your best. And repair is always possible, which is why I teach this work, partly to prevent trauma, more trauma happening, and partly, well, as part of the prevention, to repair what has happened. Unseen origins, understanding the prenatal roots of trauma and dissociation. And the class today is about prenatal awareness. You know, how can we have prenatal awareness? And relevant nervous system development and dissociation. Next time, in 2 weeks, we'll be looking more at some specific traumas that can happen in the womb, and more about how to meet them. So, and here is a beautiful little one. I want to start by just saying that from the field of pre- and perinatal psychology, we now know that we definitely have prenatal experience, memory, and learning. There isn't really a question about it anymore. There's so much evidence and documentation, and more all the time. But most people in our modern Western world would have that question, you know, how on earth could we have experience in the womb, or remember it, or be learning anything? We don't even have a brain yet, you know. And it's been very common until fairly recently to believe, for the scientific world to believe, that memory and consciousness doesn't start until language develops around age 2. So there's a confusion around memory, because they're really referring to explicit memory without acknowledging that we also have implicit memory. So explicit memory is conscious, verbal memory. It's remembered within a context. There's time involved, sequencing, more of a left brain kind of activity. But implicit memory develops long before explicit memory and language develop. And it's in the body, it's in our emotions, it's in our behavior. So it's demonstrated through behavior, attitudes, symbolic language, and images, dreams, and play. So I've included some images here of tunnels, children going through tunnels. You know how children love to play with tunnels. So in pre- and perinatal therapy, we find that often that relates to their birth experience. So a child who's been stuck on their way out at birth will tend to get stuck at the same place in the tunnel, the play tunnel, that they got stuck in their birth, for example. But there are other tunnels as well prenatally. So think about going down the fallopian tube and before implanting in the womb. And even before that, you know, the sperm goes through tubes to get to the egg. The egg goes through a tube to get to the sperm. there could be memories from that are being reenacted. So we can hold that in curiosity. I included a few books here just because there isn't time in this. This is such a short class to go through it all. But if you're interested in this territory and you haven't yet encountered Thomas Verney, I really encourage you to read his book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. This was the first popular book about pre- and perinatal psychology, and Thomas Verney is a Canadian psychiatrist, and he's brilliant. It's a really great book. And around the same time, David Chamberlain, who he died a few years ago, but he was such a delightful psychologist and a hypnotherapist. He wrote a book called The Mind of Your Newborn Baby, where he actually did research with hypnosis, where he worked with mother-child pairs when the child was growing up and hypnotized them separately to take them back to the birth of the child and got them to describe the details. And the details that the mother and the child related generally were basically the same, and they were checked against the birth records, and when one of them was off, generally it was the mother. The child was generally more accurate. That's interesting, isn't it? And then there's this person, Cherionna Menzam-Sills. And I put down here the prenatal shadow because I think it's also a helpful introduction to this work. I think later I'd mention my other book on this territory, which is this one, Spirit into Form, which actually goes into a lot more detail about our prenatal development, both the embryology and the psychological milestones that we go through. So how might we be having memory and learning and awareness even before the nervous system and brain develop? So we know that cells and tissues have memory and are learning. I used to have to go through a lot of effort to find research backing up what I knew about cells, cellular memory. And then Thomas Verney wrote this wonderful book just I think a couple of years ago, The Embodied Mind, where he gathered all of the research in this territory and put it together in one book. And it's quite scientific, but it's also very readable, so highly recommend it. But one way that I think about it and often talk about it is that we know that cells have memory because we have an immune system. The immune system has been really big in the news the last few years. It would not exist without cellular memory. So immune cells have awareness. They recognize a foreign intruder. And if they haven't met it before, they create a new receptor site so that next time it shows up, they will be equipped to meet it. Okay, that's awareness, that's learning, that's memory, right there in cells. Okay. So we also know that cells will contract to protect themselves. A unicellular organism will do that. So if a unicellular organism is in a petri dish, in a solution, and a toxin is put into that solution, the unicellular organism will contract. Right? Cells know how to do that. They're aware of their environment, and they respond or react to it intelligently. There's intelligence there. And we all know that tissues can contract. Anybody here ever have a sore muscle? Our tissues, especially our fascia, contracts. But little ones in the womb are developing tissue, right? Even before they develop a nervous system. And their cells and their tissues are responding to the context that they're in.